Hey guys, tonight we begin with something gritty, grand, and absolutely unforgiving. Life in the Roman Empire. Not as a senator, not as an emperor. No golden laurel crown, no marble baths. Tonight you're not Julius Caesar. You're just you, dropped unprepared into a world of sandals, sewage, and state-sponsored crucifixion. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to the sounds of yelling chickens and a baby crying somewhere down the hall. Congratulations! You've just woken up in a Roman insula, the ancient version of an apartment building. Think of it as a multi-story death trap held together with dust, prayer, and very questionable architecture. You're probably living on the third or fourth floor, which is bad news. The higher the floor, the poorer the tenant, and the more likely your ceiling collapses when someone spills olive oil above you. Your room is small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, with stone walls that sweat in summer and freeze in winter. There's no window, just a little hole that lets in air, smoke, and occasional pigeon. The mattress stuffed with straw and lice. The blanket smells like damp wool and regret. There's no furniture, no decorations, and certainly no kitchen. Cooking inside is forbidden. A small fire could ignite the whole building. And fire codes haven't been invented yet. Your only possessions are a clay cup, a worn-out tunic, and maybe a wooden comb if you're feeling fancy. There's no toilet. Not in your room. Not in your building. Your chamber pot sits in the corner, silently judging you. You'll have to carry it down narrow, rickety stairs that empty it into the street gutter, hopefully without slipping and adding your body to the morning offerings. Oh, and the walls, paper thin. You hear your neighbor praying, coughing, arguing with his wife, and unfortunately not arguing with his wife. If you catch my drift, the air is heavy with smoke, mildew, and the distinct perfume of unwashed humanity. Someone's already baking bread downstairs, but you're not invited. The street vendors are yelling prices for figs and fish guts. A distant centurion is barking orders at someone who's probably already bleeding. You're not even out the door yet, and you're sweating, itchy, and possibly inhaling lead dust from the plumbing. Welcome to the Roman workday. You're not an emperor. You're not a gladiator. You're just another poor soul in an overcrowded tenement. Try not to fall down the stairs or anger a city god before noon. And you've still got 23 hours to go. Now that you survived the climb down the crooked stairs of your insula, it's time to address the second most urgent matter of the morning, your bladder. There's no bathroom in your apartment, of course. No sink, no flush, not even a bucket with dignity. Instead, you shuffle down the street, chamber pot in one hand, modesty in the other, toward the nearest latrina, Rome's version of a public restroom. And calling it public is generous. It's a social club for strangers who don't mind making eye contact while doing their business. You arrive to find a long stone bench with holes cut into it. Beneath the bench, a shallow trough flows with water, just enough to carry away the collective shame of the city's lower classes. You sit if you dare, and hope the person beside you does want to chat. Privacy? Not a thing. Doors? Absolutely not. People treat it like a town square with extra acoustics. Businessmen discuss grain prices while squatting. A retired soldier talks about his sciatica. Meanwhile, you're just trying not to look directly across from you, where another man is chewing olives and not breaking eye contact. Then comes the real treat, the dorsorium. It's a communal sponge on a stick, kept in a bucket of vinegar or salt water. In theory, you rinse it before use. In practice? Well, let's just say the sponge has seen things, unspeakable things. You wipe hesitantly and hope the vinegar did its job. If you're feeling lucky, maybe you brought your own rag. If you're feeling rich, maybe some moss. But chances are you just use what everyone else used and now carry the quiet shame of shared hygiene. And if you think you can skip this ritual by going an alley, think again. Public urination laws exist, fines are real, and Roman law enforcement is not known for subtle warnings. Once you're done, you wash your hands. Wait, no you don't. There's no soap, no running water. Just a rinse from the communal basin that's seen more fingers than a handshake competition. You leave the latrina feeling lighter and slightly more dead inside. But hey, that's Rome. And now it's time for breakfast, if you can call it that. So you've done your morning business and managed not to fall into a gutter or get arrested. Impressive. Now it's time for breakfast. The most important meal of the day, unless you're Roman, in which case it's more a polite formality before work and misery. Welcome to the Ientaculum, a Roman morning feast that consists of precisely two things: stale bread and watered-down wine. Sometimes there's cheese, sometimes there's olives, but mostly there's just disappointment. Forget about coffee. The Romans didn't have it. No eggs, no bacon, no pancakes, and certainly no milk lattes. Breakfast is not meant to be satisfying. It's meant to not kill you. Your bread is likely panis rusticus, a rough, chewy lump of grain and grit baked yesterday or the day before. It's dense enough to qualify as a weapon and textured like limestone. The wine is diluted because even they knew that being drunk before sunrise in ancient Rome was a bad idea, unless you were a senator. There's no kitchen in your apartment, so you eat this meal standing in the street or squatting beside a fountain alongside other equally unenthused citizens gnawing on bread like flavorless tree bark. If you got a bit of oil or a smear of garum, Rome's famously salty fermented fish sauce, then congratulations, you've added aromatic horror to your already bleak meal. If you're wealthy, maybe you get fruit or honey, but you're not. You're a normal Roman citizen, just rich enough to not be enslaved, and just poor enough to envy your neighbor's broken jug of goat milk. Sometimes vendors walk by selling hot chippy fritters or honey pastries, and for a moment, you feel hope. But you remember your coin pouch is emptier than a gladiator's sympathy, so you bite your bread and pretend it's cake. And this is how the day starts, with carbs, mild dehydration, and a growing realization that you're about to walk 7 miles on Roman sandals with nothing but stale crumbs in your stomach and a buzz from last night's leftover wine. It doesn't get better, because now it's time to go to work. After your hearty breakfast of bread and mild despair, it's time to face the Roman workday. And let's be clear, unless you're a senator, a poet with a patron, or one of the lucky few who inherited land from a dead uncle with no heirs, you are working and you're doing hard. You might be a laborer, porter, potter, bricklayer, street cleaner, or if your luck's truly sour, a sewer worker. Rome needs a lot of things: roads, aqueducts, temples, baths, and someone has to build them. That someone, you, with your bare hands under the sun, wearing sandals that provide all the arch support of a soggy leaf. The Roman workday starts early, very early. The sun is barely up, but the foreman already is, yelling in Latin and waving a stick. If you're late, you're docked a day's pay, or worse, beaten, shamed, or fired, which in Roman terms means you starve with honor. Your tools are basic. You dig with a shovel made of splinters and prayer, carry bricks on your back, and haul water from a cistern that smells like old socks and ambition. There are no gloves, no helmets, just sweat, dust, and the constant awareness that one slip might crush your spine and your career simultaneously. And if you're a craftsman, good luck. You're competing with hundreds of others selling the same clay pots, sandals, or cheap tunics. Underpricing is common, and quality doesn't matter if a richer citizen decides he doesn't like your face. Even more elevated jobs like messenger, accountant, or teacher aren't glamorous. You're either running through Rome's chaotic streets with scrolls under your arm, writing numbers for someone who will forget your name, or try to teach Latin to a group of senators' children who already think they're gods. Women They're working to spinning, weaving, selling vegetables, or managing stalls in the markets, plus raising children, plus managing a household, plus not dying during childbirth, multitasking before it was cool. And after all this, you get a short break for lunch, maybe, if your supervisor isn't in a bad mood or trying to impress a visiting prefect. So yes, you work or you die trying. Rome may be eternal, but your back won't be. So you've made it through the morning without fainting or being flogged. Now it's time to navigate the ancient Roman street, a chaotic, crowded gauntlet designed by someone who clearly hated personal space and public health. Picture it. The sun's high, the city's buzzing, and the street is alive. Not in a poetic way, in a literal way. Rats, flies, stray dogs, livestock, beggars, merchants yelling in 6 languages, children running wild, thieves pretending to help old ladies while pocketing your coin purse. It's like Times Square, if Times Square had no plumbing and everyone was carrying a goat. Let's talk infrastructure. Roman roads were engineering marvels, perfectly straight, massively paved, and usually overflowing with a blend of urine, spilled wine, vomit, animal waste, and the remains of last night's garum sauce. The middle of the street functions as an open sewer. Step off the raised footpath without looking, and congratulations, you've just baptized your sandal in the holy waters of human misery. Wagons clatter by with no speed limits, no crosswalks, and zero chill. They don't stop for pedestrians. In fact, Roman law actually banned heavy cart traffic during the day in the city, which means drivers race through at night, in the dark, without brakes, like charioteers on a deadline. If you're not crushed by wheels, you'll be bumped by elbows, baskets, or an angry fishmonger shouting about spoiled eels. Then there's the air, thick with smoke from cooking fires, incense from temples, the scent of public latrines wafting on the breeze. Oh, and dead animals. Sometimes people just leave them there. If a dog drops in the forum, someone might just toss a cloth over it and walk away. And don't forget public spectacles, spontaneous brawls, impromptu protests, or a politician's parade that blocks traffic for hours while trumpet players blast off-key fanfare in your face. So yes, the Roman street is alive and out to get you. Slip on a fig, get hit with a runaway cart, or accidentally offend a patrician's pet monkey, and your day could end faster than Caesar on the Ides of March. And you were just trying to go buy lentils. You're sweaty, dusty, and desperately craving a splash of something cold. The good news, you live in Rome, a city renowned for its aqueducts, those magnificent engineering marvels that carry fresh water from the hills straight into the heart of the empire. The bad news, that water doesn't care about you. Unless you're wealthy enough to live in a domus with your own private fountain. You're sharing water with thousands of your closest coughing, sneezing, not washing their hands neighbors. Your options are the public fountains, where everyone fills their jars, washes their feet, and occasionally dunked a child for fun or hygiene. And by hygiene, we mean a wet version of hope. If you want to wash up, your best option is the thermi, the Roman public baths. They're everywhere and everyone uses them. Sounds civilized, right? But here's the thing. The water cycles through multiple pools with no soap, no chlorine, and very little shame. You'll be sitting in a tepid bath with a dozen other men, none of whom believe in modesty. Conversations are loud, political, and occasionally naked. A man might try to sell you socks, while another cleans his ears with a stick. And the water, it's been through everyone. If you were hoping to feel clean, think again. You're marinating in bacteria with a hint of eucalyptus. Also, fun fact, the plumbing system often uses lead pipes. Yes, lead. Romans were obsessed with engineering, but not chemistry. Over time, that convenient indoor plumbing could cause all kinds of delightful side effects like anemia, gout, infertility, and if you're truly lucky, madness. Want to drink something safer? Wine. Seriously, water is viewed with suspicion, especially in the poorer districts where contamination from latrines and street runoff is common. So wine is diluted and consumed throughout the day by men, women, and children alike. Because what better way to survive a crumbling empire than with a gentle buzz? So yes, Rome brought water into the city before most of the world knew what a pipe was. But for the average citizen, it's a gamble every time you drink, bathe, or rinse your toes. Enjoy your aqueducts. Just don't trust them. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where pain isn't just a possibility. It's the background music of your entire life. You stub your toe, no ice, no painkillers. You grit your teeth and keep going until it either heals wrong or falls off. Break a bone. You wrap it in a dirty rag and try not to breathe too hard. Get a splinter. Good luck. That's how infections start and how you might end. Roman society isn't big on comfort. There are no ergonomic tools, no padded seats, no concept of taking it easy. If you're a laborer, you're lifting bricks with a hernia and a prayer. If you're a soldier, you march 20 miles a day with bleeding feet and a scorpion bite on your thigh. If you're a woman in childbirth, well, welcome to agony. Your midwife might know a chant. That's about it. Every part of your body is one misstep away from becoming an open wound or a cautionary tale. And unless you live near a temple with a very dedicated priest, your best option is homemade ointments, herbal smoke, or simply ignoring the problem until it resolves itself, or you get resolved into a grave. There's no such thing as anesthesia. Surgeries are performed while you scream into a block of wood. Dislocated shoulder? It's popped back in by a man named Marcus, who learned from watching someone else fail at it. Dental work? Picture a blacksmith. Now picture your mouth. That's the scene. And if you're enslaved or poor, people don't even pretend to care. You could be bleeding out on the side of the road, and the best you'll get is, don't stain the mosaic. Even upper-class Romans embraced pain as proof of virtue. Stoicism was the philosophy of the day. Enduring suffering without complaint was seen as noble. If you cried over a broken arm, you weren't just in pain, you were weak. Real Romans suffer silently, then write poetry about it later. So yes, pain is always on the table, and it usually comes without warning, without remedy, and definitely without sympathy. On that cheerful note, let's take a look at what happens when you actually go see a Roman doctor. So you've hurt yourself. Maybe it was the infected blister from yesterday's work, or maybe you tried to shave with a bronze blade, and now your chin looks like a gladiator training ground. Either way, it's time to seek medical attention, which in ancient Rome was less about healing and more about surviving the attempt. Let's begin with the basics. Roman medicine is a chaotic mix of Greek theory, mystical guesswork, and a surprising amount of leaves. The core belief? The body is ruled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling off? One of them is out of balance. The solution? Drain something. So your doctor, who may or may not also be your barber, immediately reaches for leeches or a knife, because bloodletting is a default treatment for everything from migraines to moral failings. Have a cough? Let's open a vein. Depressed? We'll just drain some sadness out of your arm. Surgery? Oh yes, it exists. Roman surgeons had scalpels, forceps, and even bone drills. What they didn't have were anesthetics. You stay conscious through the whole procedure, gripping the edge of a wooden table, while a man in a dirty toga digs into your flesh with the confidence of someone who once saw a scroll about it. Antiseptics? Not really a thing. They might wash wounds with wine or vinegar, which does help, but also burns like divine punishment. Infection is a common side effect. So is death. Prescriptions vary wildly. You might be given honey, garlic, crushed beetles, or a poultice made of herbs, ash, and very specific types of animal dung. If things get worse, you're advised to sleep in a temple, pray to Asclepius, and hope divine dreams will deliver your cure. And if none of it works, well, your doctor shrugs, your family lights a candle, and your neighbors start whispering about what kind of omen your death might be. It's not that Romans didn't care about health. They just hadn't quite figured out what helped and what murdered you more efficiently. So next time you sneeze, be grateful for modern antibiotics and that you don't live in a world where healing often starts with blood loss. After a long day of sweating, bleeding, and dodging carts, you're starving. Time for dinner, or as the Romans called it, cena. Just don't expect anything remotely comforting. Let's start with what's not on the table. No pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, no potatoes, no chocolate, no sugar, and absolutely no coffee. None of those things have been discovered or imported yet. This is an Italian cuisine. This is pre-Italy edible survival. You sit down to a wooden bowl of something brown and vaguely hot. It's probably pulse, a porridge made of spelt beans or lentils. It tastes like wet gravel with a hint of herb, if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, it tastes like wet gravel without the herb. Protein is rare unless you caught it, trapped it, or fish it yourself. Meat is expensive. And even when you do get some, it's off and off. Roman cooking didn't use refrigeration, so preservation meant heavy salting, smoking, or marinating in garum, a fermented fish sauce that smells like dead ocean and burns your soul just thinking about it. If you're feeling festive, there might be boiled vegetables, hard cheese, or the occasional figure. Rich Romans dine on exotic dishes like roasted flamingo, stuffed dormice, or jellyfish in vinegar, delicacies that mostly scream, "Look at how rich I am and how little I care about taste buds." Your wine is watered down, always. Drinking it straight is seen as barbaric. But don't worry, the water it's mixed with is probably questionable too, so you're just choosing how fast you want to get sick. Dessert? Maybe dried fruit, maybe nuts. Or maybe you're fasting because it's a feast day honoring a god who frowns on gluttony. Either way, you're not ending the night with a tiramisu. There are no napkins. You wipe your hands on a cloth shared with 10 other people, or just use your tunic and pretend it's clean. By the end of the meal, your stomach is full but uneasy, and your breath smells like garlic, wine, and slight despair. But at least you're fed. Now all you have to do is survive the Roman nightlife. And trust me, that's not a relaxing stroll. After a long day of grime, toil, and fish sauce, you might be hoping for a little leisure. Something to take your mind off your crumbling apartment and the open sewer outside. Well, good news. You're in Rome, where entertainment is everywhere. Bad news? Most of it is horrifying. Let's start with the main event, the Colosseum, the crown jewel of Roman engineering, and the place where your soul quietly dies. This is where crowds gather to watch men stab each other for sport, wild animals devour criminals, and sometimes, if the emperor is feeling dramatic, reenact full naval battles with real water and real drowning. It's free to attend, which sounds generous until you realize it's free, because the state wants you distracted while the Senate raises taxes and quietly annexes Armenia. You sit packed between sweaty strangers, cheering as a gladiator loses a limb. There's blood, sand, and occasional public executions with extra flair. You're clapping. You're not sure why. Feeling a little sensitive? Prefer theater? Head to the amphitheater for a Roman play. Maybe a tragedy written in Latin you barely understand. Or a farce. So body the punchline involves someone pretending to defile Jupiter with a sausage. Subtlety is not the Roman strong suit. If you're feeling sporty, try the Circus Maximus. Chariot races are fast, thrilling, and regularly fatal. There are no guardrails, no helmets, and lots of shouting. Crashes are inevitable and spectacular, and the crowd loves it. They're here for the violence and the betting. Don't cheer for the wrong team unless you're ready to fight your way home. And then there's the street entertainment, fire breathers, acrobats, musicians, con artists, and the occasional philosophical rant from a barefoot man with nothing to lose. If you don't like the show, wait 5 minutes. Something else or someone else will start yelling. But behind all of it, there's a strange, brilliant madness. Rome didn't just distract its people. It dazzled them into forgetting how brutal daily life was. It weaponized spectacle. And if that doesn't numb you enough, there's always more wine. Now, let's take a walk through justice, Roman style. Spoiler, it's not comforting. You survived work, dinner, and a gladiator getting impaled for applause. You might think you're safe now, that as long as you keep your head down, the law will protect you. Ah, that's adorable. In Rome, the law doesn't protect, it reminds you that you're small, replaceable, and that mercy is a luxury reserved for statues of emperors. First off, legal status matters. If you're a citizen, you have rights, in theory. You can't be flogged in public unless someone important gets really annoyed and you get a proper trial. If you're non-citizen, justice comes in the form of a fist, a branding iron, or a swift execution outside the city gates. Slaves? They are property. If a slave murders their master, even if the master deserved it, every slave in the household might be executed just to send a message. That message? Don't even think about it. If you're accused of a crime, don't expect a calm chat with a lawyer. Trial's a public theater. The wealthier party brings witnesses, bribes, and dramatic gestures. You bring your tunic and a sinking feeling. If you cry on cue, that might help. If you have no patrons, pray to Jupiter and hope the magistrate isn't hungover. Punishment are designed not just to hurt, but to deter. Thieves can be branded or have their hands broken. Liars might get their tongue pierced. Fraud, public flogging, or exile. If you're lucky, and if you insult the emperor, it's not jail time. It's death, usually creative. Some crimes require public punishment, ideally in front of a crowd that cheers louder than they did for the morning's beheading. Crucifixion is popular, long, slow, humiliating. It isn't reserved just for Jesus. It's the go-to for rebels, robbers, and anyone the state wants to make an example of. And remember, law enforcement isn't there to help. The vigilas are Rome's version of firefighters and police, underpaid, overworked, and often corrupt. If you're mugged, they might shrug. If you bribe them, they might help you mug someone else. So yes, Rome has laws written in stone, recited in forums, but they serve power, not justice. Now let's talk about God, because you're not just obeying men here. You're on Jupiter's turf. After surviving the streets and dodging Roman justice, you may hope to find comfort in religion, a little peace, a little personal spirituality. Nope, not here. In the Roman Empire, religion isn't a private affair. It's an institution, an ever-present cloud of incense and obligation wrapped around every waking moment of your life. You don't choose your gods, they choose you, and there are so many. There's a god for everything. Door hinges, Cardea, sewers, Colosseum, boundaries, terminus, and even mildew, Robigus. You can't walk 5 paces without crossing a shrine. If you don't pause to bow, light a candle, or mutter a prayer, you're not just being rude, you're inviting catastrophe. Maybe not today, but eventually. And when your roof collapses, everyone will nod and say, "Ah, yes!" He skipped the Saturnalia offering. Religious festivals fill the calendar, dozens per year. On those days, business stops, animals are sacrificed, and the air smells like roasting bull and wet marble. You attend out of piety, but also fear, because if the gods aren't honored properly, they'll retaliate with plagues, droughts, or a really bad harvest that ruins everyone's lentil supply. Now, let's talk about emperor worship. The state wants you to revere the emperor not just as a ruler, but as a living god. You're expected to offer incense at his altar, sing his praises, and never roll your eyes during a triumphal procession. That's treason adjacent. If you're caught not participating in public worship, say you're a little too quiet during the Vestalia, or you don't show up to toss grain into the temple flame, you could be labeled impious, atheistic, or worst of all, suspicious. Suspicion in Rome is like blood in shark-infested waters. And if you're part of a foreign cult, You'd better keep that under wraps unless it's officially approved. The state doesn't like unfamiliar gods unless they bring wine, taxes, or new soldiers. Roman religion isn't about belief. It's about ritual. You don't have to feel it. You just have to do it correctly, on time and in public, and you better smile while you sacrifice that goat. Speaking of social performance, let's climb the greasy pole of Roman ambition in the next chapter. You bowed to the gods, avoided a lawsuit, and survived a public bath without contracting something mythical. But here comes the most exhausting part of Roman life, the social hierarchy, a brutal, finely tuned machine where every word, gesture, and sandal strap placement could make or break you. Roman society is a ladder, but it's covered in oil and lined with daggers. At the top are the senators, old money, togas with purple stripes, and land ownership so vast it has its own postal code. Below them, the equestrians, the wealthy business class. Then come the plebeians like you, the struggling middle and lower classes. Below that, freedmen, slaves, foreigners, and the guy who accidentally insulted a statue of Augustus once. Want to move up? You'll need patrons, powerful individuals who protect you in exchange for lifelong loyalty, errands, favors, and the occasional vote. It's like having a boss, godfather, and landlord rolled into one charmingly condescending package. Each morning, you visit your patron's home as part of the salutatio. You wait in line with other clients, praise his haircut, maybe compliment his son's toga, then beg for a favor, usually money, food, or a recommendation. If you're lucky, he tosses you a coin and lets you carry his litter through the forum. Congratulations, you're now connected. Every move you make is watched and judged. Your clothes must be clean, not fashionable, just clean. Your speech must be proper, your friends carefully selected, and whatever you do, don't show ambition. That makes people nervous. If you rise too quickly, others will conspire to knock you back down, socially or literally. Networking is warfare. Gossip is currency. The wrong comment at a banquet can end your career. The right marriage can save your entire bloodline. But you better play it carefully. Love is for poets. The rest of Rome marries for alliances and estate access. And even if you climb high, don't get too comfortable. One bad harvest, one missed ritual, one jealous rival, and it's all over. You won't even hear the dagger coming. Now the sun is setting. Surely things calm down at night, right? Not in Rome. The sun dips below the rooftops of Rome, and for a fleeting moment you think, maybe now, finally, you can rest. But nightfall in the Roman Empire isn't a time for peace. It's a shift in tone, from noisy and chaotic to dark and downright lethal. First, let's talk about lighting. There isn't any, unless you're rich enough to burn oil lamps all night, and few are. Most people rely on moonlight, memory, and blind hope to find their way through the labyrinthine alleys of a city. If you trip and fall, no one's helping. They might just take your shoes. The vigiles, Rome's official night watchmen, are supposed to patrol the streets, prevent fires, and stop crimes. In practice, they're overworked, underpaid, and often more interested in napping than heroics. Some are brave. Most are bribable, and all of them are outnumbered. Criminals know this. Thieves, muggers, and the occasional bored ex-gladiator roam the shadows, looking for easy marks. If you're walking home alone, you're the easy mark. It doesn't matter who you are. Unless you're armed, fast, or invisible, you're at risk. And then there's fire, Rome's greatest nighttime terror. Insuli, those charming death trap apartments you sleep in, are made of wood and dreams. Cooking after dark is illegal for this reason, but laws mean little to a hungry tenant. A single overturned lamp can reduce an entire block to ashen hours. The Great Fire of 64 didn't start itself, but once it did, it raged like Mars in a bad mood. You might think your building is safe until you smell smoke at midnight and realize there's no organized evacuation plan. You grab your one tunic, your chamber pot, and maybe your dignity, and sprint for your life down a collapsing staircase. And if it's not fire or thieves, it's noise. Drunken parties echo through the streets. Processions for obscure gods parade by with drums and shouting. And if a senator's mistress is upset, everyone within a 3-block radius knows. Sleep in ancient Rome is a luxury. Silence is a myth. And safety? That's reserved for the wealthy, the armed, and the extraordinarily lucky. But hey, morning's almost here. You just have to survive one more night, and then repeat. The sun sets on Rome, and with it you might expect a moment of calm, a breeze, a quiet meal, maybe even sleep. Think again. Rome doesn't go silent at night. It simply shifts into something darker, louder, and more dangerous. The city never truly sleeps. It prowls. Let's start with fire. Roman buildings, especially the tall wooden insulae where the poor live, are tinderboxes waiting for a careless oil lamp or cooking fire to turn them into ash. There's no real fire department, just a vigiles, who are part firefighter, part night watch, part deeply underpaid janitor. They carry buckets and hope. If your apartment catches fire, you might be rescued, or you might become a cautionary tale in tomorrow's gossip. Then there are the thieves, cut purses, and pickpockets who treat the moonlight like a hunting license. Rome's alleys are narrow and unlit. Torches are expensive. If you must walk after dark, you're doing so by feel, by instinct, and hopefully not by yourself. Don't carry anything shiny. Don't make eye contact. And whatever you do, don't get caught between two drunken gladiators arguing about someone's missing sandal. Speaking of drunk, the city's nightlife is booming. Taverns spill over with cheap wine, loud music, and men shouting bad poetry about Mars and women they'll never impress. Fights break out. Dice games end in blood. And sometimes an angry noble decides to settle a grudge by having a slave beat someone in the street. You hide in the shadows and pretend you didn't see anything. If you're a woman walking alone, good luck. Rome is not kind to unchaperoned females after dark. The streets belong to the desperate, the reckless, and the dangerously bored. Trying to sleep isn't much better. Your insula creaks like it's thinking about collapsing. Rats scurry through the walls. Your neighbor coughs like a dying goat. Somewhere nearby, someone is screaming, either from passion, murder, or both. You press your face to a sweaty pillow and pray to Mercury for silence. But there is no silence in Rome. Not for you. Because in the Roman Empire, even the darkness is loud. And when dawn comes, you'll have to do it all again. You woke up in a crumbling insula, survived public toilets, chariot traffic, gladiator gore, lead poisoning, leeches, religious festivals, burning rooftops, and half-cooked lentils soaked in fermented fish sauce. You bowed to gods you don't understand, obeyed laws that don't protect you, and slept through riots, rats, and the occasional public decapitation. You're dirty, tired, possibly infected, and emotionally scarred by the communal sponge. And it's only been one day. Would you last another? Honestly, no, you wouldn't. Most modern humans, with our air conditioning, antibiotics, and 5-minute delivery windows, would crumble by lunchtime. You'd give up before the second round of garum. And yet the Romans did it for centuries. Because here's the maddening, magnificent thing. In the middle of all this filth, brutality, and noise, Rome worked somehow. They built cities, roads, aqueducts, libraries, temples, and amphitheaters. They expanded their empire across continents. They administered laws, developed philosophy, mapped the stars, performed surgeries, and invented concrete. Concrete, that stuff still holds up better than most modern buildings. They created systems that shaped Europe and beyond for 2,000 years. Latin became the root of half the languages you hear today. Their architecture inspired cathedrals, parliaments, and college campuses. Their political concepts, republics, senates, veto power, still echo through modern democracies. But it came at a cost. For the average Roman, not the emperors, not the marble-bathed elite, daily life was a hard-fought grind, and yet they endured. They adapted. They didn't have a choice, because Rome wasn't made of gold. It was made of sweat, fear, ambition, and survival, layer by layer, person by person, century by bloody century. And that's why it lasted. You'd be begging to go back to modern plumbing and antihistamines by mid-afternoon. You'd trade your entire denarii pouch for a hot shower and a chair with a back on it. And that's okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone, somewhere, once walked those same filthy streets and helped build the empire. So you could sit here today, clean, safe, and mildly horrified. Imagine being a Parthian princess in the 2nd century BC. You've got royal blood in your veins, a name fit for legend, rotogun, and more importantly, you live in a world where your family spends more time fighting rebels than hosting dinner parties. Rotogun wasn't born into peace and pearls. She was born into grit, horses, and the constant possibility that someone might poison your dates. Her father, Mithridates I, was no idle king. He was the one who expanded Parthia from a dusty fringe kingdom into a formidable empire that would one day spar with Rome. But expansion comes with problems, namely rebellions, betrayals, and those neighbors who just won't accept that your army now owns their backyard. As a young woman, Rotogun would have grown up watching envoys argue, commanders draw maps in the sand, and palace scribes try and keep track of who was loyal this week. She wasn't trained just in silk and ceremony. She learned statecraft, command presence, and how to wear armor that didn't clash with her earrings. It's important to understand the role of Parthian women here. While not always given the spotlight, Parthian noble women were no strangers to power. Some ruled cities, others plotted dynastic alliances, and a few, like Rotogun, became legends not for who they married, but for who they defeated. And defeat she did, but that part comes later. At this point in her life, Rotogun's name was already known. She was a symbol, not just of royal lineage, but of Parthian pride. She carried with her the expectation that she'd either marry a king or become one in spirit. She didn't seem content with sitting on the sidelines while cities burned or provinces rebelled. While most royal ladies were being oiled and perfumed, Rotogun was likely brushing up on military reports and court logistics. She had no time for vanity, and as fate would have it, she would one day make a vow that involved not washing her hair until rebellion was crushed. Spoiler alert, it took a while. But before we get to that dusty crown moment, we need to understand what kind of rebellion dares provoke a princess who would rather lead troops than wear gold. The Parthian Empire, grand as it appeared on a map, was more duct tape than marble, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the edges of Mesopotamia and beyond. It was stitched together by marriages, oaths, and the occasional sword pressed firmly against someone's neck. So when a rebellion flared up in the western provinces, likely in Media or Babylonia, it wasn't exactly surprising. What was surprising was how bold the rebels were. These weren't just disgruntled tax evaders. These were full-blown aristocrats and city leaders, angry at the central power, and perhaps emboldened by the young age or absence of a male royal enforcer. They didn't just throw a fit. They took fortresses, silenced Parthian envoys, and essentially told the crown to go polish its own sandals. Now, under ordinary circumstances, the king would have dispatched a general or a cousin with too much ambition and too little brains. But these weren't ordinary circumstances. For reasons still debated by historians, maybe timing, maybe logistics, maybe sheer royal defiance, Rotogun herself took command, and not just in the abstract, I'll approve the battle plans kind of way. No, she got on a horse, donned armor, and made a public vow that would become the stuff of legend. She would not wash, comb, or otherwise tend her hair until the rebellion was crushed. It was bold. It was dramatic. It was, frankly, a nightmare for court stylists. But that vow, dramatic as it sounds, wasn't vanity. It was a declaration, a visual symbol that tied her personal dignity to the fate of the empire. Every time someone saw her tangled, dust-laden hair, they'd be reminded, this isn't over until we win. And that worked. Soldiers rallied. The troops didn't just see a princess. They saw a commander who was literally letting her beauty decay with the war. She embodied Parthian resilience, the kind that didn't rely on thrones but on thorns, dust, and sweat. Meanwhile, the rebels probably didn't know whether to laugh or panic. They had expected a general, maybe a diplomat. Instead, they got a furious, unwashed woman who was riding straight for their gates with steel in her eyes and no time for conditioner. And worse, she meant business. When Roto Gun set out from the capital, she wasn't escorted by a lavish court parade or showered in rose petals. She was accompanied by cavalry, grit, and the weight of an empire that needed its rebels squashed like an overripe fig. And she looked the part. Gone were any signs of courtly delicacy. Her hair, famously unkempt, began to take on a life of its own, hanging like a banner of war-torn determination. In a world obsessed with appearances, she turned her own into a weapon. The campaign was not swift. This wasn't a single siege, easily resolved with a bribe and a battering ram. The rebel cities were fortified and confident. They had expected hesitation from the central power, not a battle-hardened woman galloping through the dust with fire in her gaze. But Roto Gun didn't waver. Her military instincts were sharp, perhaps sharper than many of the men who had led before her. She employed classic Parthian strategies, mobility, feigned retreats, and hit-and-run raids. Her forces would appear at the edge of a rebel-held city, vanish like smoke, and return a day later from an unexpected flank. Reports suggest her soldiers admired her not just as a symbol, but as a tactician. She didn't ride behind the lines. She was up front, dirt under her nails and fury under her helmet. And as the weeks dragged on, so did her hair. It said that by the third month, the strands had begun to knot into ropes full of dust and sweat and the whispers of battlefield prayers. But that only made her more terrifying to her enemies and more revered by her men. Rebels called her the Witch Queen, not because she practiced magic, but because no noble woman should still be fighting in the field and refusing a bath. Surely, they reasoned, something unnatural was at work, but there was nothing magical about it, just sheer, unrelenting discipline. By the time her army laid siege to the final rebel holdout, the legend had grown faster than the rebellion had. In taverns and tents alike, soldiers joked that the enemy wasn't afraid of Parthian swords. They were afraid Roto Gun would never wash again. And truth be told, they weren't entirely wrong. The last stronghold rebellion loomed ahead, a walled city rumored to be impenetrable, where the rebel leaders had dug like ticks on a dog. Supplies had been hoarded. Archers lined the parapets, and the gates had been reinforced with the kind of smug confidence only traitors possess. They believed they could outlast Roto Gun. Big mistake. By now, her appearance was legend. Word had spread not just through the empire, but into enemy territory. The woman who won't wash, they whispered, has arrived. Some said her hair had turned to iron. Others claimed she hadn't slept in weeks. The myths piled up like siege ladders. But Roto Gun was no myth. She was real and she had tactics. Instead of launching a reckless assault, she opted for a slow, punishing siege. Cut off trade routes, intercept messengers, poison wells. The rebels had braced for a battle of swords. Instead, they got starvation. She weaponized time itself, letting her enemies rot from the inside out. And all the while, she camped outside the city with her soldiers, just another commander beneath the canvas tents. She shared their meals, gritty bread, and lukewarm wine. She inspected their armor. She led patrols, and she still, despite every opportunity, refused to so much as touch a comb. For her soldiers, the vow had become sacred. No one dared suggest she break it, even in jest. It had become a living embodiment of Parthian pride, a symbol that their suffering wasn't for nothing. Every tangled strand was a reminder we are still in this fight. Inside the rebel city, morale crumbled. They had expected to demoralize the enemy by holding out. Instead, it was they who began to wither. Their own commanders began to argue. Food ran low. Rumors of desertion began to ripple like cracks through stone. And then came the breaking point. A small gate left unguarded for just an hour, perhaps out of fatigue, perhaps sabotage, was found by one of Rotogun's scouts. That night, under the cover of darkness and wind, her forces slipped in and opened the main gates from within. By morning, the city was hers, and Rotogun, face streaked with sweat and ash, stood atop the battlements, unbathed, victorious, and utterly terrifying. Victory was not declared with trumpets or parades. It was declared with water. After months of dust, battle, and relentless pursuit, Rotogun stood before her army not in royal robes, but in the same battlefield garb she had worn since the campaign began. Her armor bore dents from rebel blades. Her face was lined from sun and strain, and her hair, her wild, matted, filthy hair now hung down her back like a lion's mane made of wire and legend. But she had done it. Every rebel city had fallen. Every oath breaker had been brought low. And now, with her vow complete, she could finally do what no one in the Empire had dared attempt to rush. She could wash her hair. According to tradition and later accounts passed down through oral history, Rotogun summoned her servants not to a golden chamber, but to a public courtyard. She wanted her soldiers, the ones who bled beside her, to witness this moment. Basins were filled, oils were warmed, cones were retrieved from storage like sacred relics. And then, under the open sky, the warrior princess of Parthia, caked in the grime of war, began to scrub away months of rebellion. It was symbolic. Every tangle undone was another city reclaimed. Every rinse of water over her scalp washed away defiance, soaked into the earth as if the land itself had been restored. Some say she wept, others say she laughed. But what no one disputed was the silence among the troops as they watched. Hardened men, scarred and sunburned, stood like statues as Rotogun emerged from a ritual transformed. No crown was placed on her head. She didn't need one. The dust had become her diadem. The act of not washing had become more powerful than any jewel. And in that moment, Parthia didn't just have a princess. It had a symbol. She could have returned to court in triumph, let the scribes compose flattering odes, allowed nobles to fall over themselves in praise. But she didn't rush back to luxury. She stayed with her troops a while longer. She dined with them. She listened to them. She knew that her legend had just begun, but she didn't want it forged in gold. She wanted it forged in memory. After the hair washing that became an event for the ages, Rotogun could have ridden straight to the capital with fanfare, banners, and enough propaganda to last a century. But she didn't. Instead, she took the long route back, deliberately visiting the cities she had reclaimed one by one, walking their streets, inspecting their defenses, and ensuring no embers of rebellion still glowed beneath the ashes. This wasn't mere ceremony. It was strategy. Rotogun knew the danger of victory, how quickly it can melt into complacency. Empires don't fall from defeat alone. They fall from forgetting why they fought in the first place. She wanted the rebels and loyalists alike to understand that Parthian strength wasn't just cavalry and coin. It was embodied in her very presence, a woman who chose hardship over comfort and earned loyalty by example, not decree, and loyalty she received. Everywhere she went, people gathered not to gawk at royalty, but to stare and awe at her, not polished, not perfumed, but real. She didn't bring fear. She brought accountability. She asked for reports, heard complaints, paid for supplies out of her own war coffers. She rewarded cities that had stayed loyal and offered clemency, carefully, cautiously to those who repented. By the time she reached the royal court, her return had already become a legend. Scribes rushed to record her tale. Artists argued over how to capture her, wild-haired and battle-worn, or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered about the implications. A woman commanding armies, keeping oaths, and now standing at the heart of Parthian power with the loyalty of half the provinces in her hand. And here was the dilemma. What do you do with a princess who was more popular than most kings? Some urged she be married off, as if that would contain her influence. Others wanted her placed in charge of border defenses permanently. But Rotogun didn't seem concerned with titles or politics. She had proven what she needed to. The battlefield had been her throne, the dust her crown, and her name, already etched in the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike, needed no royal inscription to endure. She didn't need a coronation. She had already been crowned, not with gold, but with history. In the months following her campaign, Rotogun didn't seek the limelight, but followed her anyway. She became a subject of poetry, sculpture, gossip, and awe, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Every soldier who'd fought under her command returned with tale, and every tale made her larger, more enduring, more untouchable. Yet in the palace halls of Parthia, where politics slithered like snakes behind silk curtains, her silence was unnerving. She didn't boast. She didn't lobby. She didn't ask for titles or lands. Instead, she observed, listened, and understood the real battlefield had only shifted from stone walls to whispered conversations. Even the king, her father, or possibly her brother, depending on the exact moment in the tangled Parthian dynastic timeline, had to tread carefully. Rotogun wasn't just popular. She was respected in a way few men at court could compete with. Not adored for beauty or bloodline, but for leadership, for command. She had turned her vow into policy, her filth into folklore, and yet the silence she kept was as deliberate as any military maneuver. She didn't tell others what she planned next, because perhaps even she didn't know. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting. She wasn't commanding troops or outwitting rebels. She was still, and that stillness unnerved many. What does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? One theory among historians is that Rotogun used this silence as leverage. Her presence alone, her every quiet nod or glance forced decisions. Officials hesitated to propose bad policy for fear she'd frown. Generals delayed campaigns, hoping she might weigh in. Her silence wasn't passive. It was a tool. She had discovered that not speaking could be more powerful than speaking, and so she remained a living legend walking the palace corridors, her freshly washed hair braided not just in gold thread, but in memory. Her very existence challenged the norms. She had proven that Parthian might wasn't confined to masculine hands. It could ride into battle with tangled hair and return with cities at its feet, and all she had to do now was wait. Because sometimes the greatest move is no move at all. As the years passed, Rotogun's name slowly faded from the formal records. Parthian scribes, more eager to elevate kings and dynasties than unruly warrior princesses, began to downplay her campaign. The silence she once used as a weapon now became the excuse for erasure. No grand mausoleum was raised in her name. No epic poem commissioned by the state bore her face on golden scrolls. But that's the thing about true legend. It doesn't need permission to survive. In the outposts where her army had marched, in the villages she spared, her name remained a whispered spell. Mothers told stories of her to their daughters, not as a fairy tale, but as a warning to any man who underestimated a woman with a mission. Soldiers recited her tactics as if they were sacred text, and rebels, well, even decades later, they still spoke of her as if she might ride again from the dust with hair flying like war banners. There's something profoundly unsettling about someone who breaks every rule of their time and still wins. Rotogun wasn't content to be decoration in a court. She didn't play the flute, paint birds, or practice the refined art of being quietly ignored. She burned through her time like a comet, and then vanished just as quickly. Historians have debated what became of her. Some believe she retired from public life. choosing peace over politics. Others think she remained an advisor in the shadows, shaping Parthian strategy from behind the veil of anonymity. A few romantics claim she rode out one final time to settle a border dispute and disappeared into legend, never confirmed, never denied. But what's certain is this: her legacy endured where it mattered most, in the people. She may not have worn a crown, but she ruled in ways no diadem ever could. She redefined what loyalty meant. She showed that a vow, even one as strange as refusing to comb your hair, could be as binding as a royal decree and far more inspiring. And though history books may offer only a footnote, the dust of Parthia still remembers her, because you don't need a marble statue to be eternal. You just need to keep your vow and win. Centuries after her death, Rodogun's story remains a paradox. Well known in whispers, yet elusive in ink. No towering statue bears her likeness. No royal tomb sings her praises in carved stone. But in the collective memory of those who admire rebellion, endurance, and principled ferocity, she is immortal. Not in the way kings are remembered, but in the way forces of nature are. She didn't need to conquer foreign lands or sign monumental treaties. What she conquered was expectation. In a world where women were told to wait behind curtains while men spilled blood in their name, Rodogun tore the curtain down and marched out barefoot, helmet in hand. She didn't ask for command. She took it, and the empire didn't collapse. It followed. More importantly, she taught her people a lesson that no decree can enforce, that loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from seeing your leader suffer beside you, from watching them choose discipline over comfort, from watching them keep a vow longer than anyone thought possible. She wasn't perfect. No legend is. But her story endures precisely because it wasn't polished or clean. It was tangled, muddy, honest, like her hair on that final day of victory. In that filth was dignity. In that vow was a vision of leadership stronger than any title. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess. They saw someone who believed in the fight more than her own vanity. And that's the part history couldn't quite erase. Even now, long after Parthia has crumbled and its cities turned to sand, her name returns in moments of resistance. Artists revive her. Writers search for her footprints. A vow not to wash until victory. It sounds absurd to some, but to those who've had to claw their way through injustice, it makes perfect sense. Rodogun was never about glamour. She was about grit. And in the end, it was the dust that crowned her, not gold. Dust, the same substance emperors try to escape in death. Yet the very thing she wore like a badge of honor. She was forgotten by kings, ignored by chroniclers, but remembered by the dust. And that's where legends truly live, not in stone, but in soil. Before empires clashed and blood soaked the sand. Before kings trembled at her name. Tomyris was simply a daughter of the wind, born to the raw, open steppe. The land she came from was not gilded in marble or echoing with philosophy. It was brutal, free, and endlessly vast. This was the world of the Massagetæ, fierce nomadic horse archers who rode like spirits of plains, their lives shaped by survival, honor, and war. We know little of Tomyris' childhood, but we can imagine the rhythm of it. She would have learned to ride before she could run, to shoot before she could speak in full sentences. Among the Massagetæ, girls were not caged in tents or veiled by silence. They trained beside the boys, rode with the warriors, and grew up with iron in their blood. To lead, one had to bleed. And Tomyris, even as a young woman, bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sun and sky, lived off their herds, and buried their dead with weapons, ready for battle in the afterlife. They had no cities, no golden temples, but they had pride, and when enemies approached, they met them not with prayers, but with arrows. Tomyris likely came to power after the death of her husband, who may have ruled the tribe before her. But what's certain is that when the moment came, she didn't inherit leadership. She seized it. In a time when most women were considered property, Tomyris commanded an army. She negotiated with kings. She dared to speak as an equal. And if they didn't listen, she made them. She was more than a queen. She was Shahmat, the steppes checkmate, a war chief in bronze and leather who would soon face the greatest empire on earth. But power, especially for a woman, never comes without consequence. As Tamers began to solidify her rule, whispers grew louder. Across the mountains to the south, a king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set. The steppe wind howled in Tamers, daughter of warriors, would soon ride into legend. While Tamers reigned over the open steppes, far to the south, a different kind of power was rising. Structured, imperial, relentless. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already conquered Lydia in the west and Babylon in the south. His banners flew over deserts, mountains, and cities where languages changed every few days' ride. But Cyrus wasn't done. He was a builder of empires, and every builder eventually eyes the horizon. To Cyrus, the Massagedae were a threat wrapped in opportunity. They weren't rich in gold or cities, but they controlled the northeastern frontier, and that meant access to key lands, resources, and trade routes. More importantly, the Massagedae had something no empire could afford to ignore: pride. And pride in Cyrus's eyes could be bent or broken. But Cyrus also knew that brute force wasn't always the best first move. He had a reputation for cleverness, diplomacy, and strategic trickery. So he tried a different approach, one that kings before him had used to dissolve threats without a single drop of blood. He proposed marriage. According to ancient sources, notably Herodotus, Cyrus sent envoys to Tamers offering an alliance through matrimony done on paper. It was a royal match, the great king of Persia and the warrior queen of Massagedae. But Tamers was naive. She saw the proposal for what it was, not an offer of love or partnership, but a calculated attempt to absorb her people without a fight. She declined, and that rejection didn't sit well in the halls of Persepolis. With the diplomatic games over, Cyrus shifted to his favorite language: war. He ordered his army to cross the Araxes River, the natural barrier that separated Persia from the land of Massagedae. He was going to take what Tamers refused to give. But Tamers was already preparing. She knew the terrain. She knew how her people fought, on horseback, fast and furious. And most of all, she knew Cyrus wasn't just coming for land. He was coming to crush a woman who dared to say no. The world's most powerful king had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of fury. He had just awakened on the steppe. Cyrus the Great, master strategist and seasoned conqueror, believed he could outwit Tamers. He had faced kings, crushed cities, and subdued nations. To him, the Massagedae were little more than wild nomads with fast horses and no cities to defend. He didn't realize he was stepping into the path of someone just as cunning and far more furious. Tamers had warned him after rejecting his marriage offer. She sent a clear message: cross the Araxes River and you will regret it. But Cyrus crossed anyway, building a bridge of boats to carry his army into Massagedae land. Instead of striking immediately, Tamers pulled her forces back, luring Cyrus deeper into unfamiliar terrain. The Persians found an abandoned camp, well stocked with food, and more importantly, wine, a luxury the nomadic Massagedae rarely indulged in. It was a baited trap, and Cyrus took it, perhaps thinking the enemy had panicked and fled. Inside the camp, he left a portion of his army under the command of General Harpagus, a trusted officer. As the Massagedae returned under the cover of night, they fell upon the drunk and unsuspecting Persians with deadly precision. The battle was brutal and swift. Among the dead was Spargopizes, Tamers' son, and a Massagedae commander. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Spargopizes was taken alive and, realizing his capture, begged for death and took his own life. Others claim he was killed in the fighting, but all agree when news reached Tamers, Something inside her shattered and then turned to steel. Her grief was volcanic, but her rage, that became legendary. She sent another message to Cyrus. This one wasn't a warning. It was a vow. "You may be a glutton for blood," she said, "but I swear I will give you your fill." She promised to make the ground run red with Persian blood, and her vengeance would not be quiet. Cyrus had taken her son. He had violated her land. Now he would meet not the queen of the massage day, but the mother of a slain warrior, and the last face he would ever see. The next battle would not be a skirmish. It would be an execution. The sun rose over plains like a blade, sharp and blinding. Tamaris stood at the head of her army, no longer just a queen, but storm-given form. Her warriors, hardened by the nomadic life, painted their faces with ash and rage. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about blood. Cyrus, for all his might, had underestimated the massage day. He assumed they would fight like the tribes he had conquered before. Chaotic, uncoordinated, easy to crush. But Tamaris had spent her life among warriors. She understood how to strike, not blindly, but with precision. She rallied her forces for a full-scale assault on the Persian invaders. And this time, she wasn't holding back. The location of the final battle is lost to history, swallowed by the vastness of the steppe. But what's clear is that Tamaris launched a ferocious counterattack. Her cavalry swept across the plains like a tide of knives. They fired arrows from horseback, closed in with axes, and fought like people with nothing left to lose. The Persians, battle-hardened, disciplined, and experienced, weren't expecting this level of organized fury. Tamaris didn't just lead her troops. She fought beside them. Her presence on the battlefield ignited her warriors like wildfire. Every strike was driven by vengeance. Every charge was an answer to her son's death. Cyrus tried to hold the line, but it shattered. The Persians were routed. Many died where they stood. Others fled into the endless grasslands, only to be hunted down. And Cyrus the Great, the man who had conquered Babylon, Lydia, and nearly the known world, fell into chaos. Whether he was slain in combat or captured and executed depends on the version told. But either way, he died on Tamaris' terms. What came next is infamous. According to Herodotus, Tamaris found Cyrus's body on the battlefield, ordered his head severed, and then, in a final act of symbolic revenge, submerged it in a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink your fill," she said, "of the blood you thirsted for." Was it historical fact or poetic embellishment? Maybe both, but it didn't matter. The message was eternal. Tamaris was not to be conquered. When the dust settled and the grass drank deep the blood of empire, Tamaris stood victorious, a warrior queen who had done what no king or army before her could. She brought Cyrus the Great to his end. News of the defeat sent shock waves across the ancient world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, thought to be unstoppable, had been humiliated by a woman from the steppes. The Persians did their best to downplay the loss, but the death of their founder couldn't be ignored. Cyrus's body was eventually returned and buried with honor in the royal tomb at Pasargadae. Yet the stain of his final defeat would linger like a wound on the empire's legacy. For Tamaris and Massage Day, however, the victory was more than revenge. It was a declaration. They had defended their sovereignty not just with weapons, but with dignity. Tamaris had stood up to the world's most powerful ruler, and she hadn't just survived, she had triumphed, and then she vanished from history. No record survived detailing her later years, her death, or any successors she may have appointed. It's as if, after taking her vengeance, Tamaris simply rode back into horizon and allowed the wind to carry her legend forward. In the centuries that followed, historians, poets, and chroniclers would try to fill in the blanks, turning her into a symbol as much as a woman. To the Persians, her name was a bitter reminder. To the Greeks, she was a paradox, a barbarian who displayed more nobility than many kings. And to peoples of Central Asia, Tomarus became folklore, a ghostly queen who rides through the steppe, fierce and unbending, with a sword that remembers. Her legacy would inspire countless depictions across cultures. Medieval manuscripts portrayed her in regal armor. Renaissance paintings imagined her towering over Cyrus's corpse. In every age, she became what people needed: a mother avenger, a wild queen, a lesson in hubris, or a symbol of feminine power. But one truth cuts through the myth. She changed history. Tomarus didn't inherit a throne. She forged it in fire and fury. And for one brief, unforgettable moment, the steppe queen proved that not all empires rise. Some fall to the hooves of warriors who ride with vengeance in their hearts. Much of what we know about Tomarus comes not from local Massageday records. They left no stone tablets or royal archives, but from the pen of a Greek Herodotus, often called a father of history. Writing a century after her time, he immortalized Tomarus in his histories, casting her as a warrior queen of astonishing resolve and terrifying vengeance. But Herodotus wasn't simply reporting facts. He was weaving a story, one part chronicle, one part morality tale, to him and his Greek audience. Tomarus represented the ultimate reversal of imperial arrogance. Cyrus the Great, a man who had conquered half the known world, fell not to a vast army or a rival king, but to a woman who fought not for glory, but for her child. Her victory was almost mythic, and Herodotus treated it as such. He even detailed her grisly revenge, the wineskin of blood, the severed head of Cyrus, and her damning words, "Drink your fill." But was it true? Modern historians debate this endlessly. Some argue that Herodotus exaggerated or even invented parts of the tale, using Tomarus as a narrative tool to humble the Persian Empire, which at the time he was writing was still a looming force over the Greek world. Others believe that while the blood wineskin episode might be symbolic, the core event, Cyrus's death at the hands of Tomarus, likely did happen. There's also the question of bias. Herodotus, for all his insight, often filtered foreign cultures through a Greek lens. He portrayed Massageday as wild and free, yet noble, an exotic mirror to Greek ideals of honor and liberty. Tomarus, in that frame, wasn't just a barbarian. She was a moral counterweight to Persian ambition. Still, even if details blurred over time, Herodotus succeeded in one thing. He ensured Tomarus would not be forgotten. Because of him, she became more than a historical footnote. She entered the realm of legend, where facts soften but impact sharpens. And in that space between myth and memory, Tomarus' story found a strange kind of immortality. In a world dominated by kings and conquerors, Herodotus left us a queen who refused to kneel and left her enemies bleeding in the sand. Though she may have slain one of the ancient world's most iconic emperors, Tomarus never ruled an empire herself. She didn't build cities of stone or inscribe edicts on golden tablets. Her people, the Massageday, were nomads, living not by walls, but by the rhythms of the land, the sky, and the horse. This meant that Tomarus' legacy was never institutionalized. There were no marble busts or royal coins bearing her likeness, no archives to immortalize her decrees. Instead, her story passed on as stories do on the steppe, through firelight song and the whispered all warriors. The Massageday were one of many powerful tribes of the Central Asian steppes. Their cousins included the Scythians, the Saka, and the Dahi, all expert horse archers who roamed the lands between the Caspian Sea and the borders of ancient China. These tribes were feared by empires for their mobility, unpredictability, and ferocity in battle. Tomarus, as a female leader among them, was rare, but not entirely unique. Steppe culture, unlike many sedentary civilizations, allowed women far greater freedoms. Women rode, hunted, fought, and even led. Among the Scythians, graves of female warriors buried with weapons, armor, and horse gear have been found by archaeologists, confirming that the stories of fierce steppe queens were more than just legend. Tamaris stood at the pinnacle of that tradition. Her power didn't come from inheritance or religion. It came from respect, grit, and sheer capability. She was a unifying force among scattered clans, a political leader and a military commander in a landscape where survival meant riding faster, shooting better, and fearing nothing. But because of massage, they left no monuments. Tamaris became a kind of phantom queen, her name echoing only in the writings of outsiders and in the oral traditions of the steppe. To the Persian scribes, she was a warning; to the Greeks, a marvel; and to her people, likely a memory carried in bloodlines and battle songs, a ghost who rode with them across the plains. Empires may rise and fall in stone, but the stories of the steppe live on in the wind, and Tamaris, fierce, grieving, and unbroken, became its voice. Centuries passed, and the empires that once surrounded the Massage rose and crumbled. Cyrus's successors built Persepolis, fought Alexander the Great, and faded into the dusty footnotes of time. But Tamaris, her legend endured, not in the palaces of kings, but in the hearts of those who refused to bow. Across Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She became a symbol of female strength, of resistance, of the untamed spirit of the steppe. In many ways, Tamaris embodied a kind of defiance that transcended geography. She was not Roman, not Greek, not Persian, and so her story belonged to no empire. That made her dangerous and inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, chroniclers occasionally mention her name, reshaped by language but never quite forgotten. In some versions, she was praised for her justice and vengeance. In others, she was seen as a savage queen, a reminder that power in the hands of a woman could be both glorious and terrifying. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, European artists rediscovered her tale through the writings of Herodotus. Painters depicted her in elaborate armor, standing triumphantly over Cyrus's lifeless body. In one dramatic painting, she holds a severed head aloft like a trophy, blood-soaked and victorious. It was theatrical, yes, but also political. These artists were fascinated by the idea of a woman who didn't just survive in a man's world. She won. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Tamaris became a nationalist icon in regions like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and educators reclaimed her as a historical heroine, proof that the roots of Central Asian identity were fierce, proud, and deeply feminine. Her name appeared in textbooks, statues, and even military ceremonies. A woman who had once ruled on horseback with bow in hand was now riding once more through memory and myth, through rebellion and pride, in a world that still wrestles with the idea of powerful women. Tamaris remains a challenge. She wasn't perfect, saintly, or tame. She was decisive, brutal when necessary, compassionate only to those who deserved it. She was resistance in human form, and the blood of empire on her hands was a crown she wore without apology. History tends to favor the builders of monuments, the writers of laws, the kings who carved their names into stone. Tamaris did none of these. She left no empire behind, no palace to excavate, no royal seal to decipher, and yet her name still lives, not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be erased. She stands as a contradiction to how history often remembers women, not as helpmates or footnotes, but as forces of destiny. Tamaris didn't beg for recognition. She took it with blood and fire. She didn't ride behind a king. She rode against one and one. Her story is retold in classrooms from Central Asia to Europe, not simply because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She wasn't defending an empire. She was defending freedom. A freedom that rode on the backs of horses, that hunted with hawks, that slept under stars. A freedom that could not be neatly drawn on a map. Today, her statues rise from Kazakhstan's capital cities, and her face adorns coins and textbooks. To modern Central Asians, she is a mother of nations, a link to a pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic past, a reminder that their identity wasn't born in submission, but in the cry of battle and the gallop of horses. In a world still divided by power, by gender, by memory, Tomarus is a beacon, not just because she killed a great king, but because she taught us something even greater. That dignity is not given, it is seized. That sometimes leadership looks like a mother grieving her son and refusing to let the killer walk away. We often wonder why some names survive while others vanish. Tomarus survived because she was unforgettable. Because in a time when women were expected to disappear into the tents of men, she rose, blade in hand, fury in heart, and carved her story into the flesh of history. Empires fall, statues crumble, but legends ride. And somewhere in the whispering winds of the steppe, a queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't a hobby. It was a state-sponsored science with divine approval, long before modern apiaries. Egyptians had already developed an organized mobile system for managing bees and extracting honey. By 2400 BCE, beekeeping was depicted in detail on the walls of tombs in the sun-drenched necropolises of Saqqara. It wasn't just about harvesting honey. It was a sacred practice embedded in agriculture, medicine, religion, and even the afterlife. The Egyptians used horizontal clay tube hives, typically stacked in rows and laid on their sides. These were nothing like modern wooden boxes. They looked more like terracotta drain pipes, and they were carefully designed to be relocated seasonally. As the Nile's floodwaters receded and flowers bloomed along its banks, hives were moved up and down the river to follow the nectar flow. This transhumance method was incredibly advanced for its time, almost like ancient GPS for bees. Beekeepers used clay or stone pipes to blow smoke into the hives, common to bees before honey extraction. Without protective suits, these keepers had to rely on careful timing, experience, and a fair bit of courage. Honeycombs were removed gently, and the honey was collected not just for food, but for medicine, mummification, and sacred rites. Honey was considered a gift from the gods, a divine substance associated with Ra, the sun god. According to Egyptian myth, bees were born from the tears of Ra as they fell to earth. This wasn't poetic fluff. It shaped how the Egyptians treated bees as messengers between the mortal world and the divine. Honey was used in temple offerings, funerary rituals, and even as a currency in trade. It also had a prominent role in medicine. Ancient papyri list honey as a key ingredient in over 500 remedies, mixed with herbs, wine, or milk to treat wounds, infections, and gastrointestinal issues. Its antibacterial properties were known, even if the science wasn't. Beeswax, too, was harvested and used in cosmetics, embalming, and even in writing tablets. It had value beyond the hive, becoming part of daily life for scribes, priests, and healers alike. In Egypt, the hive wasn't just a source of sweetness. It was a symbol of balance, healing, and celestial order, carefully cultivated under the watchful eyes of both humans and gods. While Egypt gave beekeeping structure and sanctity, ancient Mesopotamia gave it something equally vital: laws. The cradle of civilization didn't just master irrigation, writing, and city building. They also knew the value of honey and the importance of protecting its production, though Mesopotamian beekeeping wasn't as visually celebrated as in Egyptian tombs. Its traces are found in cuneiform tablets and legal codes, suggesting a quietly sophisticated practice. References to bees and honey appear as early as the Sumerian period. In Akkadian and Babylonian texts, there are mentions of Ninsur, meaning be gardens or apiaries. These spaces were often attached to temple grounds or royal estates, suggesting honey production was an elite-controlled resource. Honey and beeswax were used in religious offerings, medicine, food, and trade, and losing a hive could be a serious economic blow. The most telling piece of evidence comes from the Code of Hammurabi, dating to around 1754 BCE. While most of the code is famously devoted to issues like theft, injury, and agriculture, a few lines directly address bee disputes. If someone allowed their bees to swarm into another man's field, and the bees caused damage, they were liable. If honey was stolen, restitution had to be made, sometimes in the form of silver or replacement jars. In a world where almost everything was counted in grain, the fact that honey warranted its own legal protection speaks volumes. Mesopotamians also understood bees as more than just insects. Some texts describe them as divine messengers, even linking them to Ninurta, the god of agriculture and war. Beeswax, in particular, was valued for sealing documents and creating ritual figurines. It was both practical and mystical, part of both bureaucracy and magic. Though the exact design of Mesopotamian hives isn't fully preserved, scholars believe they may have used mud brick or woven basket hives, similar to early Levantine styles. These would have been kept in shaded gardens or rooftops, protected from the harsh summer heat. Mesopotamian beekeeping was less about worship and more about structure, regulating resources, ensuring fairness, and maintaining the economic balance of society where even a bee sting might end in litigation. Here, the hive was not just a biological wonder. It was a microcosm of order, law, and the civilizing impulse itself eyeing the rugged highlands of Anatolia, long before the Greeks took center stage. The Hittites were quietly mastering the art of beekeeping, and they weren't treating it like a backyard hobby. To the Hittites, bees were sacred agents of purity, messengers between realms, and essential to both agriculture and the spiritual health of the kingdom. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, where beekeeping was a blend of science and economics, the Hittites took a more ritualistic approach. In religious texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, bees are mentioned not just as producers of honey, but as active participants in purification rites. One famous Hittite ritual text describes a ceremony in which a bee is summoned to go and remove the evil, the impurity, and the wrath of the gods. The bee is then released, not killed, a rare show of mercy in ancient rites, suggesting a deep reverence for the insect. The Hittites valued honey for its taste and its sacred utility. It was used in libations, sacrificial offerings, and anointing rituals, often combined with wine, milk, or grain. Honey wasn't just consumed. It was poured, burned, and blessed. It served as a medium between human intention and divine reception. In terms of practice, evidence suggests the Hittites used clay or woven hives, likely stored in protected enclosures near temples or royal estates. Though the archaeological record is sparse, parallels with neighboring Levantine and Syrian traditions hint at portable tube-like hives, possibly made from straw and mud, stacked and managed much like those in Egypt. Beekeepers in the Hittite world likely operated under temple control. Their work deeply embedded in seasonal festivals and state rituals. Honey was not a mere commodity. It was a tool of diplomacy, healing, and spiritual cleansing. The bee, small and unassuming, held symbolic weight that far exceeded its size. The Hittites also contributed a vital piece to the global understanding of bees. They recognized bee migration. Some surviving texts describe the seasonal behaviors of swarms, linking blooming patterns with honey flow, an insight that shows how closely they observed their environment. In Anatolia, the hum of the hive wasn't background noise. It was a sacred frequency, vibrating through the bones of gods and kings alike. The ancient Greeks didn't just study bees. They admired them, feared them, and modeled society on their mysterious order. To the Greeks, the hive was more than a place of honey. It was a living metaphor, a model for the ideal city-state, a symbol of divine order, and a source of endless scientific curiosity. Greek beekeepers advanced the science of apiculture with a blend of practical knowledge and philosophical flair. Unlike earlier civilizations that used stationary clay hives, the Greeks developed movable terracotta hives with removable lids and sections. These allowed easier access to the honeycomb without destroying the colony, an early step towards sustainable harvesting. They also mastered the art of smoke control. Using ceramic bellows and clay smokers, they would puff smoke into hive entrance, sedating the bees before honey extraction. This innovation not only reduced stings, but also preserved the hive structure, allowing for multiple harvests per season. One of the most influential minds in Greek history, Aristotle, studied bees in extraordinary detail. In his Historia Animalium, he described hive behavior, noting that bees appear to have distinct roles. Some gathered nectar, others defended the hive, and one, whom he called the king bee, seemed to lead, although he got the gender wrong. Aristotle's observations laid the groundwork for centuries of bee research. Honey held a revered place in Greek culture. It sweetened wine, preserved fruits, and flavored cakes. It was also used as a base for medicinal salves, especially in wound care, and was seen as a divine gift. The Greeks believed that ambrosia, the food of the gods, was a mixture of honey and wine. The bee itself had mythological significance. It was associated with Artemis, goddess of wild things, and Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were even called Melissae, the Greek word for bees. The idea of the bee as a sacred feminine force carried deep symbolic power. For the Greeks, the hive was both scientific marvel and spiritual emblem, a reminder that even the smallest creatures move with purpose, discipline, and grace. In studying bees, they believed they were studying the very laws of nature and perhaps of the gods themselves. If the Greeks studied bees with wonder, the Romans managed them with ambition. Beekeeping in the Roman Empire wasn't just a cottage industry. It was scaled to match the needs of a civilization that stretched across continents. From the vineyards of Gaul to the hills of Hispania, Rome turned the humble hive into an empire-wide enterprise. The Romans inherited much of their apicultural knowledge from the Greeks and Etruscans, but they expanded it into a formalized agricultural science. Writers like Varro and Columella recorded detailed instructions for building hives, harvesting honey, and relocating colonies. Their treatises describe beekeeping with a startling modernity, including observations on swarm behavior, seasonal cycles, and pest control. Roman hives came in many forms: hollow logs, cork bark containers, clay tubes, and even woven baskets sealed with dung or mud. Flexibility was key. In colder climates, more insulation was needed. In warmer provinces, ventilation was critical. These innovations allowed Rome's beekeepers to adapt the craft across vastly different regions of the empire. To calm bees, Romans employed clay pots filled with smoldering herbs like thyme or oregano. The smoke soothed the hive and perhaps added a subtle flavor to the honey. Harvesting was done with iron knives, and wax was separated by melting and straining, later used in candles, writing tablets, cosmetics, and even waterproofing ships. Honey wasn't just food, it was everywhere. It was added to wine to make mulsum, used in baking, in sauces for meat and fish, and even as an early energy source for athletes and soldiers. Roman physicians, following Hippocratic traditions, prescribed honey for sore throats, wounds, fevers, and digestive problems. Its antibacterial properties were well known and well used. But perhaps the most Roman thing about their beekeeping was organization. Large villas often had dedicated honey farms run by enslaved labor under the supervision of estate managers. Production was recorded in ledgers, and surplus honey was sold in markets or exported to distant provinces. Bees were viewed not just as insects, but as productive citizens of the Roman economy. To the Romans, a well-run hive mirrored a well-run household, ordered, obedient, and endlessly fruitful. While ancient civilizations cultivated bees for honey and wax, many also saw the hive as a doorway to the divine. Across Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond, bees weren't just insects. They were spiritual beings buzzing between worlds, delivering messages from gods, and offering sacred gifts like honey that bridged the natural and supernatural realms. In Egypt, bees were directly tied to divine creation. As mentioned earlier, mythology claimed that Ra, the sun god, shed tears that turned into bees upon touching the earth. Honey was used in temple offerings to please deities and accompany the dead into the afterlife. The bee also became a royal symbol. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt bore the title. He had the sedge and the bee, connecting their authority to the cosmic harmony of the hive. In Greece, the bee held powerful feminine symbolism. The priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, goddesses of fertility and wilderness, were called Melissae or bees. These women were considered channels between the divine and mortal realms. The Oracle of Delphi, one of the most important religious centers in the ancient world, was believed by some to have originally been presided over by bee priestesses. Even the famed Pythia, the Delphic prophetess, was sometimes called the Delphic bee. The hive itself was often seen as a microcosm of perfect order, disciplined, selfless, and productive. Philosophers and mystics compared bee society to ideal human society. Cooperative, industrious, and reverent, the Stoics admired bees for their instinctive sense of duty. Early Christians would later adopt the bee as a symbol of chastity and resurrection, noting how bees create but do not lust. In the magical traditions of Mesopotamia, bees were invoked in ritual purification. In some Hittite ceremonies, a live bee was released after absorbing the impurities of the community, literally carrying sin away on its tiny wings. Honey and wax were burned in sacred fires, used in crafting protective amulets, and embedded in magical texts for blessings and healing. The bee was more than a metaphor. It was a bridge, a creature that lived in nature's hidden spaces, made golden food without killing, and stung only in defense. To ancient peoples, bees weren't just miraculous, they were mystical. To the ancient world, honey wasn't just delicious, it was divine medicine. Long before bacteria were discovered, people instinctively knew that honey could clean wounds, soothe coughs, and preserve the body. It wasn't magic, though it often felt like it. It was chemistry, centuries ahead of its formal explanation. In Egypt, honey was a cornerstone of ancient medicine. Medical papyri like the Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, lists honey in over 500 prescriptions. It was mixed with milk, figs, garlic, and herbs to treat everything from eye infections to digestive problems. When paired with animal fat or resin, it was applied as a salve to burns and cuts. Doctors knew that wounds treated with honey healed faster and resisted infection, likely due to honey's natural acidity and hydrogen peroxide content. The Greeks followed suit. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, prescribed honey for respiratory problems, ulcers, and fatigue. He used honey mixed with vinegar to create oxymel, a tonic used to clear phlegm and reduce fevers. Greek athletes drank honey water to boost stamina during Olympic training, believing it restored strength quicker than wine or water alone. In India, the Ayurvedic system held honey, madhu, in high regard. It was classified by taste, source, and medicinal potency. Ayurvedic texts warn against overheating honey, but endorsed it as a treatment for indigestion, colds, wounds, and even poison. It was also used in religious rituals, offered to gods, and consumed during sacred fasts for both spiritual and bodily cleansing. The Romans, too, believed in the medicinal power of honey. Pliny the Elder recorded dozens of remedies involving honey in his natural history. It was a base for ointments, gargles, and laxatives, and even used to treat the wounded after battle. Honey mixed with poppy juice was given as a sedative. Roman surgeons kept it on hand to dress wounds and reduce inflammation. Beeswax had its place in medicine, too, as a base for plasters, balms, and even dental fillings. Its malleability and resistance to decay made it ideal for sealing and preserving. In short, honey in the ancient world wasn't just sweet, it was life-saving. It healed the sick, preserved the dead, and symbolized purity. It was the pharmacy of the gods delivered by the wings of bees. Ancient beekeepers were more than farmers. They were innovators, engineers, and keen observers of nature. Across civilizations, they developed specialized tools and methods that allowed them to manage bee colonies effectively, harvest honey sustainably, and even protect themselves from a bee's defensive stings. One of the most important innovations was the design of the hive itself. The Egyptians popularized the use of horizontal cylindrical clay hives, essentially large terracotta tubes stacked in rows. These hives were durable, portable, and mimicked natural cavities where bees thrived. Similarly, the Greeks and Romans used terracotta and woven basket hives, some with removable lids to allow access to honeycombs without destroying the colony. The ability to inspect and harvest without killing the bees was revolutionary, paving the way for modern sustainable apiculture. To safely extract honey, ancient beekeepers employed smoke to calm the bees. The Greeks invented clay smokers and bellows designed to direct smoke into the hive's entrance. The smoke masked alarm pheromones released by guard bees, reducing their aggression. Romans refined this by burning fragrant herbs such as thyme or oregano, which soothed the bees and possibly imparted subtle flavors to the honey. Harvesting tools varied. Wooden or bronze knives were used to slice combs carefully. Sometimes, honeycombs were pressed to extract liquid honey, and wax was melted and filtered for later use. Beekeepers often wore minimal protection, relying on experience and careful technique to avoid stings. Suits and gloves were millennia away. Ancient texts reveal that beekeepers also observed bee behavior meticulously. They understood swarm cycles, seasonal patterns, and the importance of moving hives to optimize nectar collection. Some cultures practiced transhumance, relocating hives to follow flowering plants' bloom, similar to modern migratory beekeeping. Additionally, honey storage was a crucial aspect of ancient beekeeping. Egyptians used sealed ceramic jars to store honey, protecting it from moisture and spoilage. Honey's remarkable shelf life was well known, sometimes lasting centuries sealed within tombs. Even the relationship between humans and bees was carefully managed. Rituals were performed to appease bee spirits or gods, ensuring cooperation and avoiding misfortune. This spiritual care was as vital as the physical tools in maintaining a productive hive. In all, ancient beekeeping was a blend of craftsmanship, natural science, and reverence. The tools and techniques they developed set foundations that still influence modern apiculture. The ancient practice of beekeeping laid the groundwork for a relationship between humans and bees that continues to this day. Far from a simple agricultural activity, early beekeeping was an art and science that influenced medicine, religion, economy, and ecology across civilizations, shaping the way we understand nature and sustainability. From the Nile Valley to the hills of Anatolia, from the temples of Greece to the farms of Rome, ancient beekeepers honed methods to protect and sustain their colonies. Their innovations in hive design, smoke use, and seasonal management allowed for sustainable honey harvests, a practice crucial for both survival and trade. The respect they showed for the bees' life cycles helped foster a model of harmony between humans and nature. Their understanding of honey as a medicine informed the early pharmacopoeias of Egypt, India, and Rome, influencing healing practices that persist in traditional medicine worldwide. Honey's antibacterial and preservative properties became the foundation for wound care and remedies, while beeswax shaped early technologies in cosmetics, art, and construction. The symbolic and spiritual meanings attributed to bees and honey in ancient cultures also endure. Religious rituals honoring bees and honey continue in various traditions, reflecting humanity's ongoing fascination with the hive as a metaphor for order, cooperation, and divine blessing. The idea of bees as messengers between worlds or symbols of resurrection permeates art, literature, and folklore across centuries. Moreover, the ancient practice of migratory beekeeping, moving hives to follow floral blooms, is echoed in modern commercial apiculture, essential for crop pollination and global food production. The innovations of ancient beekeepers help set the stage for today's awareness of bees as vital pollinators and the environmental challenges they face. Despite technological advances, the core relationship remains unchanged. Humans depend on bees for food, medicine, and ecosystem health, and bees, in turn, have shaped human culture, economy, and spirituality since the dawn of civilization. The legacy of ancient beekeeping is a testament to human ingenuity, respect for nature, and the enduring power of collaboration, both within the hive and between species. It reminds us that even the smallest creatures can inspire science, faith, and survival,